introductions to everybody, but then also at the same time, then we have a list of questions that have come in as well, and we're going to go work through some of those and have a presentation on what the original intent was, where it is now, where it's going, and then we have a large portion of time allocated for Q&A to make sure there's an authentic interaction. And then as for me, as always, is I'll be keeping lists of follow-up items that will need different kinds of meetings, groups, or whatever have you. So first of all, my name is James Gore. I'm your Sonoma County Supervisor, entering my 12th and final year. It's been a great ride. I won't go too much into it, but just I love public service. I don't want politics, but I love public service. It's why I was a Peace Corps volunteer. It's why I served as the Assistant Chief for Conservation around the U.S. It's why I ran for office and knocked on doors to ask for this crazy opportunity, to have both the excitement but also the craziness of it. And it's been a wild ride, and I just want to thank you all for the collaboration, the cooperation, for bringing your, whether it's your hopes and your dreams or your deep frustrations and suspicions to the table, because I'm a guy who grew up here, grew up in the valley. I was here, I think, 5644 Dry Creek Road, and then across the street in a little rental that my dad had before that, right about the time that the water opened up. And I didn't know what was happening, and it's fascinating to be at this point in life, and now I've worked on these issues, not just this, but water issues throughout our area for the last 12 years with folks from this team and others, to really just leave things better than you found them. And so I will tell you that that's why I'm here. I sit here authentically in front of you to figure out what people's hopes and dreams and frustrations and follow-up is needed, because I've dealt with it for more than a decade, and there's people who love me and people who hate me, and oftentimes it doesn't have to do with what I do, but it's my job to be here and to set up the appropriate amounts of follow-up. So that's my commitment. I want to thank Yael. I don't know if you want to just, on behalf of the Dry Creek Valley Association, I'm the current president still, right?
No.
Who is it?
We are rotating chairs.
Okay. Well,
and right now, Andrew Nall is the chair for this.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
And he is also-
I would just say, I just wanted to offer an opportunity if anybody from the DCBA wants to get up and just say, thanks for being here, or whatever, but you don't have to.
Well, I can say something.
Perfect, thank you.
Well, I just want to say that, I don't know how many of you know how the DCBA started, but I just want to give you a very brief overview. And that was back in 1974. The founding members were farmers who lived along the creek and were losing their land from the extraction of gravel. So I just want to preface it with that and say also, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you.
There you go.
So the more issues to come that we always work on. And in my final year, Yael and others, and as I just want to express my commitment, if there's, we've worked so hard, but oftentimes strategy and vision, while it's been there, it's also had to be adapted to this current situation, which is fires, floods, drought, pandemics, and other things like that. So if there's anything that I can do to be substantive, leave this in a better place. We talked about doing things with Permit Sonoma and educating on general plan, or letting people doing educations on zoning, whatever it is. I really wanted to tee that up for this year and make sure we leave things right. So I want to do some just quick introductions. Dave?
Hi everybody, a lot of familiar faces. David Manning, Assistant General Manager for Sonoma Water.
Greg Gensch, Project Engineer of the Engineering Group at Sonoma Water.
Eric McDermott, Senior Environmental Specialist at Sonoma Water.
Craig Horton, Principal Environmental Specialist, Environmental Resources.
Neil Lassiter, Principal Environmental Specialist with Sonoma Water.
I'm Cynthia Del Fuente. I with Communications and Public Affairs at Sonoma Water.
Thank you.
David Norman. I'm with Communications and Communication at Sonoma Water.
Good evening, I'm Grant Davis, the current General Manager at Sonoma Water.
passes words to you to thank you for all your efforts over the years to get to this point.
Brad Sherwood, Assistant General Manager of External Affairs and Wine Consumer.
Thank you for being here from the board. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Yep, Emily Cole, Park Ranger here at Lake Sonoma and Visitor Center Manager.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry for what you've been going through with shutdowns and budgets and everything like that. It's hard to manage a resource with that, but thank you for your work, and please share that with others.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else before we get started? Any burning organizational or something that I've missed? Bathrooms outside. As I said, first part of our presentation, when Dave starts to go into the first, we schedule about a half hour for a review of things, but we plan that to be 45 minutes because you all can stop and ask questions during. You know, you don't do a technical presentation or a foundational presentation and then wait until the end. So once we go through that, then we had planned for the remainder of our time here tonight to be all based on Q&A. I know there are people here who are looking to learn, who don't maybe not have a background, maybe they're newer to the valley. I know there's people here who have deep concerns or frustrations that they've dealt with for years. So let's just make sure we get to it, right? Dave, go ahead.
James, thank you, and it's good to see a lot of familiar faces in the room. I've been working on this project for 17 years. I'm in my 27th year at Sonoma Water, so I have a lot of tenure working here in the Dry Creek Valley. It's good to see many of you again. It has been a while since we've given you an update about this project, so thank you for being the impetus to call this meeting together. We're happy to share with you some of the results of the work that we've been doing over the past couple of decades. I'm going to give a little bit of background about the project, and then I'm going to turn it over to Greg Gensch, the project engineer, so we can talk a little bit more about the details of how we design projects. And then we're going to go through a series of presentations. I think everybody's got the agenda to talk about the monitoring associated with this project. It's a big part of the project. There's a feedback loop between what we build, what we learn, and how do we adapt what we've learned into the next phases of construction. And we'll describe that. We'll describe how the fish have responded, and then the maintenance, which is the long-term obligation that we have to the state and the federal government to maintain these projects, how that will play out, at least in the very near term. We're really just getting into that maintenance phase of the project. Here's that agenda. Hopefully everybody's got a copy of it. James, you can sit right there.
I'm going to move.
It's
My shining bald head.
All right, so just for a bit of background, back in 2008, after about 10 years of review, the federal government handed, it was the National Fisheries Service, Sonoma Water, and the Army Corps of Engineers, the Russian River biological opinion. That was based on the listing of steelhead, coho, and Chinook salmon in this part of Northern California. So a review under the Endangered Species Act resulted in a whole series of projects. One of the biggest projects, of course, here in the Dry Creek Valley, keeping the water flowing from Warm Springs Dam, but doing it in an environmentally friendly way. So that major objective was to reduce the water velocity, the speed of the water, for coho salmon in particular, which are the most critically endangered. And the objective was to enhance nearly half the creek, 6 of the 14 miles of Dry Creek. This map, which is, if you've been to these meetings over the years, should be familiar. It's subtle, but the colors really have changed as we've implemented projects. When we first came to the valley to describe this, there were colors on this map of the creek, and we have Lake Sonoma on the left, confluence with the Russian River on the right, and a whole bunch of different colors that represent the different phases of work. Everything now is that shade of tan, except for the reaches right downstream at the very confluence of the stream of Dry Creek with the main stem Russian River. We've built projects in all of these other reaches that have been identified. And we went through a pretty exhaustive process with consultants to look at the places along the stream that would have had us bypassing that relatively high summertime flow in Dry Creek in a pipeline, a long bypass pipeline that would have connected Lake Sonoma to the main stem of the Russian River, taken the majority of the flow out of the creek in the summertime. And that was a very expensive option. We demonstrated the potential of the habitat projects, and that option was taken off the table. We've now been pursuing the full build out of this project with the Army Corps of Engineers as our partners. So to bring you up to speed, that was very quickly to the current state of affairs. In 2025, we received another biological opinion from the National Fisheries Service, the Army Corps of Engineers, Sonoma Water. It's a 10-year biological opinion that covers our operations, our maintenance activities, flood control, water supply, channel maintenance, habitat restoration, and the entire Russian River watershed, and the continuation of this work in Dry Creek is an important part of that. This opinion, unlike the opinion in 2008, something called a non-jeopardy opinion. Back in 2008, the National Marine Fisheries Service determined that the ongoing Russian River project, so that's the operations at Lake Sonoma, at Lake Mendocino, our flood control operations in the watershed, including down in the estuary, really threatened the existence of salmon and steelhead. And they gave us a jeopardy biological opinion, which had some pretty stringent requirements for us to develop a way of reducing those risks. We've been implementing that biological opinion for 15 years. This one that was just issued in April of 2025 found that we're no longer likely to jeopardize the continued existence of the species if we continue to implement the projects that we've been implementing and make some modifications to them. This is a pretty significant change from what we got in 2008.
Dave, I want to just, if I can, just real quickly, for folks who don't know the vernacular, I mean, basically, for me, if I was explaining this to myself, when I first started as a supervisor, the dam started flowing in the early 80s, right? There was a federal partner that was a lead, the Army Corps of Engineers, which continues to. There's a local partner, which is Sonoma Water. So when this structure, when this dam is in flood control stage, when it's in the winter time frame, the Army Corps of Engineers runs point on managing how much water comes out. They are a flood control agency. Once it's out of that window of time, during the months of the flood season, when it's more about water management, then it operates under the control of the local partners, which is Sonoma Water. The water that comes down from this area, it's not only meant to manage flood control, it goes into our water system and it's sold to 600,000 people, right? To different areas. There's pipelines that go all over different areas. And so basically what they said is that the rate at which the water was spewing down this dry creek could not sustain the fish that were there. There's many people who say there weren't fish here before, right? It's called Dry Creek for a reason. There was steelhead, but how much did these coho and other things come up traditionally? But a biological opinion is basically a large regulatory action by the National Marine Fisheries Service, right? Underneath the Department of Interior, that says it regulates whoever manages a project. So what it does not do is say this is a healthy Russian River. What it says is you are managing a project on the Russian River and you have to do this to reduce harm. And so we have to implement the plan in conjunction with the Army Corps of Engineers to be able to deliver on whatever that project is.
Excellent.
Okay?
Thank you very much, James. Yes, I took some of this for granted. We've been before you many times. Everything James presented is 100%.
Just like to.
Is 100% accurate, and that is exactly why we're in this position of now having this updated version of the biological opinion. As long as we're continuing the flood control, the water supply operations that James just mentioned as a part of the Russian River project, we have to comply with the Federal Endangered Species Act and the State Endangered Species Act. And there are some important findings in the 2025 update of the biological opinion that we'll now be implementing, and that's that the restoration objectives and the work seem to be appropriate for the needs of the fish. And you're going to hear a lot about the monitoring, the physical habitat monitoring, some of the biological monitoring tonight that we're compelled to do and that we want to do to make sure this project, we can adaptively management it, we can improve these conditions. This is costly work, it's time consuming. We want it to have the best benefit possible for the species. And the National Marine Fisheries Service, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, they're holding us to account there. So you're gonna, all the monitoring that you see, that's reported to them, and they pass judgment. And we're pleased to see that they encourage us to continue to maintain these projects into the future, and that there's clear evidence that the populations are utilizing this newly created habitat in Dry Creek. So the requirement in the 2025 biological opinion is for the Army Corps of Engineers and Sonoma Water to continue the enhancement efforts. That takes a slightly different approach based on some of our work to date. We're to complete a small-scale project, an additional mile of restoration or an alternative project. So that additional mile of restoration does not necessarily have to be in Dry Creek. We can propose an alternative. We can talk a little bit later about where we had identified work to occur in that last mile and how there are some issues with how sustainable and durable the habitats can be in that far lower extent of Dry Creek. But regardless, we have to maintain the projects that have been completed long-term. And that's what we're here to talk to you about today. We're largely in that maintenance phase of the project. That still involves us interacting with the creek, interacting with all the property owners we have relationships with, and we're going to describe those steps to you and where we've been in the progression of this project this evening. With that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Greg. Do you want to take it from here and talk about some of the phases of the work? So, yeah, I manage our environmental division at Sonoma Water. I've been involved in this project since its inception. When it comes to the technical elements of the project, Greg Gensch, our water resources engineer, is really most versed in how these projects were created, the design process, all the expertise has been brought to bear on the projects, and so I think we're fortunate to have him here tonight and to give us an explanation of how that process is proceeded. Yeah.
I want to just make sure we track us. We're, Greg, how long are you going to be?
I'll try and be quick. I just
What
want
is
to
that?
run through like 5 minutes. Maybe.
Sounds good. We're good on that. And then after that, we'll have Neil come up, right?
Yeah.
Neil, you'll be about 10 minutes. Is that correct?
10, 15.
Okay. Try to do 10. Yes and more. But I also want us to answer questions in between. So before you jump in, any questions so far for Dave? Yeah. And if you can, introduce yourself if you'd like.
Sure. Hi, my name's Kate Gabriel Balthazar, and my project was 5A on that. Was wondering about this idea of a non-jeopardy opinion. And it sounded like, although it's a non-jeopardy opinion, it's still a mandatory requirement. Is this habitat restoration mandated to you? Are you
It is.
required to do this?
We are required to do it, yes.
Even though now it's a non-jeopardy? Could you
Yes.
just explain that? That was a
Sure.
little confusing to me.
Good question.
Sure, it's a great question. So the project that we proposed originally, before we were handed the 2008 biological opinion, it did not have some of the requirements in it, like doing 6 miles of habitat enhancement. It was found that if we were just to continue the project as we had proposed it, which did not involve habitat enhancements, it didn't involve work down in the Russian River estuary that's required, that we would jeopardize the continued existence of the species. Now that we have been implementing those projects as not recommended, as mandated by the federal government, as we've been implementing them and showing their success, the federal government has now determined that if we continue with the project that we proposed to them in getting this next biological opinion, which is a continuation of the maintenance obligations in Dry Creek, it's continuing to enhance the Russian River estuary, it's making modifications to flows seasonally in the main stem of the river to better preserve cold water in both lakes and manage the flows that are important for fish. If we implement that project as we proposed it, then we can continue on with our project without jeopardizing the future existence of the species. But we have to implement the projects as described. So they passed judgment in a different way on what we proposed to them in 2025 as opposed to what we proposed in 2008. So it's a little bit technical and wonky, but it's encouraging that we're on the right track in their eyes in making improvements for the species.
Good. Thank you. Really good. Great.
So I'm just going to try and quickly run through the design process, the phases of that. So we put out requests for proposals, and we hired consultants to do the design work. I think Dave already talked about, the biological opinion and how the resource agencies, I guess primarily NIPS and now NOAA, developed the project types, the requirements, the habitat criteria, and all the things that we have to achieve with the project. So we identified Interflu first. That's these are all consultants that are industry standards, leaders in the industry. And Interflu started with studies of the current conditions in the creek and a feasibility assessment And then a conceptual design approach to look at what types of projects were feasible in the creek. And then from there, they split the creek up into the 14 sections. Each was about a mile long, and we started the process of the first mile of design, which Interfleet did. And they developed conceptual designs, and from there, we would visit with property owners and go over those designs and kind of work with property owners to refine what's going to be done and see if they're interested. If they're not interested, we would move on. One of the big things with this is it was a voluntary basis. We didn't force the project on to anyone. We only worked with property owners that were interested and willing to participate. So, you know, if a project was going to move forward, then a detailed design would occur, and that would go through the typical design engineering, like 10%, 30, 60, 90, 100. And we would meet with owners at each step of that. All the while, you know, our right-of-way department at the agency would be working out an easement so that we can maintain the project. Because we knew that these would require maintenance. That in a creek like this or any river, you're not going to get a static situation that's going to remain, you know, in perpetuity without requiring some work. In this case, we're obligated to keep these up. We're obligated to keep these habitat features effective in order to continue to hold this non-jeopardy opinion. So, as part of the design, they would do lots of surveys, you know, hydrographic surveys, topographic surveys, engineering analyses, and modeling, sediment modeling. A lot of technical work went into these. And then at the end of it, for the first 3 miles, Sonoma Water was in charge of the construction, and we would put it out to bid and select a contractor. You know, it was a competitive bidding process, so the lowest contractor to bid the project is what we're obligated to select, and then our construction management group would inspect and monitor the project while it's being constructed by the contractor. So phases, and that was for phases 1 through 3, the first 3 miles. And then out of those first 3 miles, the first 2 were designed by Interfleet, and the third was designed by ESA, another consultant. And then miles 4 through 6, well now it's 5 because mile 6, we're doing an alternative to that. That was implemented by the Corps. So Stormwater still managed the design for that, and we still work with the right-of-way. The right-of-way still, for us, is we're obligated to maintain it over the long term. But the Corps managed the construction, and the Corps paid for the construction. It's a 65-35% cost share for the last 2 miles. And it's all the same things, except we inherited an additional group of scientists and engineers from the Corps to participate in the review and the design. And then they did an extra alternatives analysis and a pretty big process to select the project that ultimately went into those last 3 miles. And then when it was put out to bid, the Corps did that. And the Corps managed the construction, and we had lesser role in construction for the last, phases 4 and 5, which were just recently completed. So here's a picture of construction, a typical couple of sites. Like I mentioned, it's competitive bid. The contractors would, always be specialists in this kind of work. In many cases, there would be like access ramps constructed to get from Dry Creek Road down into vineyards, or there was drainage improvements sometimes necessary where they were crossing ditches or shallow pipes or things. It has to be constructed in the summertime for in-stream flow in work period based on state and federal requirements for when you can work in a stream, and it was observed by construction inspection at the Corps or Sonoma Water. So here is a map that was on the screen when you guys came in, and this just summarizes what's been done. There's been 24 different reaches and sub-reaches done. Some of those have more than one site. There's nearly 30 overall you know, like sites combined when you look at everything done, and there's been, you know, a number of these sites were previously existing bank failures that we fixed as part of the project. I have a couple pictures of that. Dave mentioned the alternative to the last phase and how that is being pursued, and that we're now in the monitoring and maintenance phase. There's been 5 large, you know, like sort of site scale maintenance activities thus far since 2012 when we started. And then I think that there's plans to maintain a few sites this year. I don't think anything too huge, at least not at this point. So, I guess we're moving on to the next.
Before we move on, were you gonna say something?
Nope, I was just gonna say,
Okay.
can we take a couple questions from
Yeah,
you, we're gonna
yeah.
get into the monitoring.
So, and I'd like us to just make sure with the upcoming presentations, let's keep it pretty high level unless people want to dive in, because I really want to make sure that we're planning to start open discussion Q&A at 7. I want to hit that if not before, just because I think there's a lot of questions. Doug, do you have a question?
Yeah, have you made that report available to the Dry Creek Association and public yet?
Have you made that report when you mean that, you mean this set of slides with the maps and everything?
Yeah, last one with all the great shots of.
You can
all
look at
sides.
that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll make all these presentations available. And then there are very detailed reports that were produced annually that describe this and a lot more about each of the project sites. That's an excellent segue to Dr. Neil Lasker here.
Yeah,
And there's
so
a
my
Dry
question
Creek
was,
in
have you
Russian.
sent those to the property owners of the Dry Creek Association?
The report is available online.
We'll send it after this if we haven't.
We can send you the link to it. They're all available on our website. These particular slides we created them for tonight, so we can share those as well. But all these data are in those reports.
Hello again, my name is Neil Lassiter, Principal Environmental Specialist with Sonoma Water in the Environmental Resources section. And I'm going to talk about our monitoring, specifically our physical monitoring, which is a requirement of this project. And then my colleague Greg Wharton will talk about the fish monitoring and the biological monitoring. So I am going to skip ahead here, and I'm going to start with
Is that the same, basically that Greg finished with?
the same map. So here we are in 2024. We have 24 enhancement reaches, as Greg just described. That's a lot of habitat. How do we monitor this? Well, we start with 3 types of monitoring. So when we were constructing, we performed what's called implementation monitoring. Is that reach constructed per approved design? And that was our construction monitors. Since we're complete construction and we're in the maintenance phase, we're not doing as much implementation monitoring. Another kind of monitoring is effectiveness, the physical monitoring. What is the physical effect of our project on Dry Creek? Is the desired habitat being created? That's what I'll talk about right now. And then there's also validation monitoring. Are the fish using the habitat, and are the fish benefiting from what we're putting out there in Dry Creek? So how do we evaluate habitat physically? And also biologically, we have a Dry Creek Adaptive Management Plan, which was developed as part of the 2008 biological opinion, and this directs how we collect data and how we evaluate the data. For the physical response, it identifies 3 primary metrics that benefit juvenile salmonids in the summertime. Depths from 0.5 to 4 feet, water velocity less than 5 feet per second, and also aquatic habitat shelter. And I'll describe that metric in a few slides. And so those are the primary metrics we use to evaluate the success of all of our reaches. And then the management plan also provides a framework where we can evaluate our reaches against these primary metrics. We can rate each one of the reaches and identify which ones need maintenance. So let me just orient you here. This is the map, the backbone of the map you just saw. So those are the Dry Creek reaches. That little red square way up there, that's the reach that I'm concentrating on right here, reach 13. And then also to further orient yourself, this is the main stem of Dry Creek, the main channel. And then adjacent to it is the Dry Creek side channel. So when we do a project, We monitor both the created side channel and the Dry Creek main channel. That's part of it. And so, how do we, oh yeah.
Yes.
Can you say also something about, whether you've been able to design these projects in a way that can withstand high flow events?
We have, and that was part of the original planning. I don't think Greg got into that, but as part of that, I mean, one of the reasons you go out there and there's these, rather large log jams is to withstand these heavy flows, and also they did quite a bit of modeling as part of the project design. So they were intended to withstand these higher flows.
And the success of that project?
I could go, I'm about to get into the success of all of them right here. So to measure, to collect the data, depth, velocity, and cover, we use survey techniques. So the gentleman on the top is using a total station. The gentleman on the bottom has a flow meter that is fitted with a prism, and the gentleman on the top is recording the location of each one of those measurements, longitude and latitude, and he's also collecting the elevation, water depth, and water velocity. And so we collect these data, and you see those blue points that just populated there? Those are all the depth, velocity, and habitat points that we collect. This is a typical reach is about 2,000 points. But we're also concerned about what happens above the water. So to collect elevation data above the water, we use a drone, and we use a drone for air photos. There's an example of an air photo in the lower left, and also the underlying photo here is taken from our drone. That's an air photo. But that drone is fitted with LiDAR, which is light detection and ranging. It's just a fancy instrument that sends out pulses of light and then measures the return, and it's able to determine the lat, long, and elevation of that point. So for each reach, we also collect points above it. And so this is about 50,000 points collected on the banks, the floodplains, and the terraces. And from this, we can construct digital maps of depth, velocity, and shelter. And from this, so from depth and velocity, we can actually identify the areas of optimal depth and areas of optimal velocity and quantify those. So we know exactly how much habitat we're creating. And then the shelter is a metric of cover complexity, how within a habitat unit, say a pool, a ripple, a flat water, how complex is your cover? Is there zero cover, or is it very complex? It's an ordinal measure from 0 to 3, and then that's a measure of your cover complexity, but then the area of that habitat unit covered by that cover. And so your maximum value is 300, which is, that's your habitat unit completely covered. But a good value is about 80, and that's what the adaptive management called for, a target value of 80. So let me just run through some quick results. So what we've seen throughout our 12 years of monitoring that we've done this project is, again, orienting yourself is the Dry Creek main channel, and this is Dry Creek main channel. And what we've seen in all of the main channels that we've surveyed over the past 12 years is 24% of the area within the main channel meets optimal depth and velocity. Whereas in the side channel, 50% of the area meets optimal depth and velocity. So it's creating the habitat that we set up to create in the BO and in the Dry Creek Adaptive Management Plan. So that's good. And then if we look at aquatic habitat shelter, again, there's the main channel. And in the main channel, we've seen a 79% or 79 mean shelter score. Top score is 300. The target score in the AMP is 80. So close to the target score. But when you compare that to the side channel, the mean shelter score was 105. So much higher than what's in the main channel. Lots of good cover. So we are creating the habitat that we set up to create within the AMP and in the BO.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
So this measurement, is that done on a certain day, like at the end of the summer? How is that selected?
We try to do that survey at the end of the summer, and we try to do all the habitat units like within 2 weeks or so. So we try to do everything when conditions are like sort of normalized.
Yeah, because I mean, I've seen side channels that are dry,
Right.
and so I guess that would be not in the percentage that.
That would be, well, if we went out there in, say, August and it was dry, it'd be a 0. So, so that's a CDFW metric, California Department of Wildlife, and they typically do it August, September, and October, and that's when we try to do it as well.
Okay, thank you.
How close does the data that you collect agree with the models that you use to design this?
Well, the models didn't predict shelter score, but the models were fairly close. I mean, I haven't gone back and looked, but they were fairly close. The models for the design, I believe, just covered the side channels, but I think the models were under-predicted, if you want to be true. But I think the models definitely predicted that there was a greater amount of optimal depth, optimal velocity in the side channel.
Because you can feed all this data back into the models these days and really fine tune them to future designs very closely.
Yeah, we could.
You have an infinite amount of data.
So, moving on here.
One
So-
last question.
Yeah, yep.
So you do your habitat maintenance between the months of June and October, I think you said.
October 15th.
And you do this data collection between the months of,
March, whenever it stops raining to whenever it starts raining. So say April to October.
okay, 'cause I thought you said September, October, or August, September, October. Well, I thought you just said,
For the habitat data.
for the habitat data. Yeah,
Correct.
That's what I mean.
Yep.
So you collect your habitat data right after you've done your maintenance?
Yes, we do. We will do that before we do the maintenance to inform the maintenance, and then after we do the maintenance, we do the survey again, actually. So we do it pre-maintenance and post-maintenance.
You do, okay.
So what are those, when you say 50%, that's the optimal, is that 50% after you did the maintenance, or 50% before you did the
Oh,
maintenance?
that's a good question. So when we collect these data, so not get too far in the weeds, sorry, James.
No.
When we collect these data, we collect the data before we do the project, and then right after construction. And then we collect it again after what's called post-effective flow, and that's flow that is able to move sediment along the stream bed. And so it's that post-effective flow that most represents what the project's gonna look like, and that's the data that I'm presenting here. So right at post-construction, it should look great, right? Because it's constructed as we want it, but we wait at least 1 year before we rate or, give a rating to the enhancement region.
Thank you.
Yes?
I probably wasn't clear, but I'm particularly interested in knowing whether the features that you design are able to resist the high flow that happens yearly, because in the EIR that was done for the final structures, years 2 through 6, there was a comment from RRWPC, and they asked whether it was to be expected that whether it anticipated no buildup of sediment and inside channels. And the response in the EIR was that the project features can be designed to withstand high flow events without being significantly impacted by sedimentation. And I'm asking whether you were successful in designing them in a way that resists sedimentation.
I'm gonna answer that question right now. It's a perfect question.
This is great.
Yeah. So again, here's that same map, and we noticed some patterns, and I know you guys know where you are here, but I'm just gonna review. There's Warm Springs Dam, there's Pena Creek, and then there is the Russian River. And within the EIR and with our initial studies, we identified 3 sort of zones in Dry Creek. One was the upper segment, which is upstream of Pena Creek, and that is influenced by the dam. There's some tributaries that come in, but there's very little sediment that's coming in that upper segment. Then there's a middle segment where we have the dam influence, the releases, but then also tributary input. And tributary inputs of water and sediment. And so we see that, and I'll show you the results. It's reflected in our results. And then this area down here, this lower segment, you have the dam influence, tributary input, but then you also have a backwater from the Russian River in higher flows. It goes about 5 miles up, and that causes velocities to drop, and that also causes sediment to drop out. So if we're looking at our project, so 24 different reaches. In the upper segment, we have 6 reaches, and our ratings up there are good. They're stable. There's not a lot of sediment. There's very little sedimentation. They've held up well. So they're stable with occasional maintenance. I don't think we've ever done maintenance in any of those reaches. And here's the middle segment. So this is where we get, there's 12 reaches in the middle, and this is where things get a little trickier for us. So you've got the dam influence and the tributary input, but you see those greens, there's some good, some excellent, but then there's some fair. Fair means that parts of these sites are not functioning as we want. Some of the features are not functioning as we want. And so that's the sedimentation that the main thing we see is aggregation. So these are a grading, yellow box.
Can you explain?
So
A grading means?
Aggregation means sediment deposition. So sediment building up in the side channel, sometimes causing it to disconnect. And then,
Oh, no, so is the 5 miles up from the confluence up with the Russian River, is that about the west side ridge?
it's a little farther upstream.
Further up?
Yeah, a little farther. So, and then we have this 6 reaches in that backwater zone, and it's very difficult to maintain these reaches. The west side road, see, 2D is right where the west side road ridge is. It's just upstream of that ridge. And what we've seen there is deposition. You get a lot of tributary input, but then you have the backwater effect, and it's difficult to maintain these reaches without constant maintenance.
Question over here. Yeah.
Yeah, Dave Lonnie, could you go back to the slide before this, please?
Can you put that whole thing up?
Yeah, I can do a summary here. There you go.
Okay, well, I see over here where you got everything rated,
Yep.
and I'm not exactly sure which one, we're right just south of, the open bridge.
I think you're 10A.
On the West Stryker side.
10, I think you're 10A.
Yeah, and there's 3 sites on my property,
Yep.
and I'm not sure with good fair. I have a problem with that because except for when they open the dam for flood stage, there's not a drop of water in those things for the last 2 years. And 2 of our side channels, they're dry. The last one is like called the back flow or something, back channel. That is 2/3 full of sediment.
Yeah. Those are.
I just have a problem with even fair. And I talked to a bunch of people this year, there was a bunch from water agency, Corps came out, and I asked exactly when they were gonna try to fix it. And what I got was, we're looking for money. So, you know if they're gonna do anything this year, because it's pretty hard for fish to go up a dry channel.
Nothing's going to happen to those sites this year. So that particular project, the Corps did lead the construction there. The Corps has not turned those project sites over to us because we're not happy with the immediate result, just like you're not and the fish are not.
Well, I spent a lot of money on that. And
Absolutely.
Dry.
So the Corps has committed funds to adaptively manage those sites and remove that sediment, and there are some good ideas of how to reconfigure things so it doesn't entrain as much sediment. There is a process of learning. There's a lot of research and a lot of study that went into designing these projects. We're dealing with a natural system that's pretty dynamic. So part of the challenge of continuing to manage this project is to adapt to the changes that we see on the creek. The Corps knew immediately that it does not meet the intent of the design, which is to provide summertime and wintertime habitat. It does get a fair rating because when the flow is really high in the creek, it's not a good place to be a small fish if you can't get out of that high flow. And the fish do actually get out of the high flow into that channel. So it works in the wintertime at a range of flows that's not the intended target range of flows. So that is high on our list of
I will tell
big
you, it
improvements.
works great for flood control.
I have just one foundational point too, which is almost the death of common sense, but it's just the way things are. So the federal government, through the regulatory arm, mandated this action through the biological opinion. The Army Corps is one of the regulated, so the federal government is regulating not just us as local partners, but itself. The Army Corps, the individuals on the ground, have done really good work with us. We have actually gone multiple times to Washington, D.C. to lobby for the federal government to give money to its own agency to implement the federal government's regulation. So we go out there and with groups of 10 people and say, we've completed our stretch, which are now it's your time. And so at different times, like that's not happening. There's government shutdowns, there's other things like that. There's no money, they can't accept money from us. We don't want to accept their liability, but it's with what's going on, it's not a surprise, but I really appreciate that comment. Yeah, ma'am? And then we'll come up right here.
Just out of curiosity, this man obviously is concerned about his property. And this could happen to anyone. Is that a priority before you start another project to make sure that whatever has happened to his property is resolved?
So the answer to that question is a little bit complicated because it involves the planning with that federal agency, the Army Corps of Engineers. So we're doing things simultaneously. We're planning for ways to adaptively manage that project. At the same time, we're pursuing other projects that need routine maintenance, and we're going to describe that routine maintenance to you later this evening. So we're looking at the project sites simultaneously.
And
in
when
Dry
will
Creek.
this man have his property resolved?
That is a question I honestly do not have an answer to. I hope it's in the next
Is
couple
it a
of years.
priority before?
It is, well, so it
it's
involves
also,
the
look,
federal
just one
government.
thing, it involves, this is a very difficult thing for somebody like you or any individual to
It
say.
could happen to anyone here.
Well, when you look and you say, but the difference is that the other projects that are managed by Sonoma Water versus a project that's managed by the Army Corps of Engineers. So when somebody looks at you and says it's not my jurisdiction, even though that's a tough answer, so we can lobby the Army Corps of Engineers, we can encourage, we can go yell, we can mandate, but the individuals who are implementing it are on the ground, like we fly out to DC, so that's what we do, right? But that's just one of the realities we deal with.
Yes.
Yeah,
There are a
it
lot
is
of
challenging.
moving parts and pieces to this project. It is it's complicated and it requires not only partnership with many of the people here in this room, but the regulatory agencies. And James, thank you for clarifying that. In this case, the Army Corps has a role both as a regulator and as a project exactly as a regulated entity by another federal agency. Yes.
You have one more question?
Yeah, if you could just walk over so the room can see, and I've been watching 5A, which is the one I'm personally interested in, if you could just point that out to the room. Yeah, and then if you could go back, you notice it's surrounded by a green box. If you go back a slide or two, till you see property, now it's surrounded by a yellow box.
It should have a yellow box.
So the other one should have a yellow box too.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So it's just a typo.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
5A is fair.
Yeah, sorry.
Fair. I would have to say that I think fair is generous. I
That's
think
what
fair is a
you're
very
saying, too.
generous way to describe this situation that's on our land.
Well,
Yes,
so we.
I would say poor to fail.
What is it,
Well,
is it similar story? Is it sediment loaded and not functioning, just as the last gentleman was saying? Is that what you would
Yeah,
say?
so every time there's a heavy rain, all the work that you guys did just falls into the river, and then it also brings down erosion from above. And I'm starting to be worried about erosion because when you take sediment out, so what you do when you correct it is you come and you excavate all that. So you keep excavating. And so then that all fills up again. But what we're doing is we're just removing material, and then it's like starts to become farmland. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's that bad right now, but I think that this is a very generous description.
What are the criteria? So what you go through, excellent, then good, then fair,
Yeah.
then poor?
And so what you see here.
Super poor?
And that's just fail, so
Yeah.
poor and then fail. So each reach is composed of different sites. So your reach, 5A, is composed of 4 sites. And so each one of those sites, we rate independently. So we rate each site, and there's habitat on the other side, there's habitat in the main stem, which actually scores very well. So it may be poor on one side in a site, but because of the overall reach it's creating habitat, it probably brings the rating up. One thing we do for our maintenance is we don't just look at that rating, we actually look at the sites and then target our maintenance to the smaller sites to try to correct those. And so what we want to do is bring that yellow box up to green, but fair represents something that means a site, which is a side channel, is not functioning as we intended, or there are features that have failed, and so we want to go in and fix those.
Yeah, and the idea behind the adaptive management plan is to force the kind of monitoring that we're conducting and a correction to what we think might be causing that sedimentation. So it's not to simply always follow the same patterns, to try to learn from what the creek is handing us, given the amount of rainfall in a particular year, the way the dam is managed and its flows. We're learning as we go. Fair is not the objective. The objective is good and excellent. And that's why this is an adaptive management project, and that's why maintenance is required for the sites. And that is the underpinning of the requirement in this next biological opinion. So the first biological opinion we were handed for 15 years was build these places where the fish can find refuge from the poor conditions that existed in the creek, and that's the really high water velocity that results from our sending that water downstream for customers all throughout Sonoma and Marin County, and from the Army Corps of Engineers flood control operations, which send the water down at a really high rate. Fish can't get out of that high flow. So it's improve those conditions and then continue to maintain them in a way that provides us benefit for the fish. And we're going to see in a later presentation that we have evidence the fish really do use these places. I mean, they are valuable to the threatened and endangered species in the creek, but it requires a lot of hard work. Neil and his staff spent all summer long, the spring to the fall, gathering these data, the most sophisticated techniques, so that we can plan to provide the maximum benefit for these species long term, and do it in a way that minimizes our maintenance. There's great cost in this project, and great disturbance, we know, to the generous property owners that have joined us in this mission to improve these conditions. We want to improve these sites that don't meet the expectations. That is our objective.
Also, just one sec. I just want to. These are good questions, and so I'm not going to rush us through, because if there's a map up and you get your question answered, then we're not going to shut you down and make you wait until we have to pull up a map later. So let's just keep going right now. But also, I just want to underpin that seems like a lot of the questions, and I knew this coming in, were going to be about maintenance, management, sedimentation. Where does it go? Where does it happen? So we do have fish monitoring and project maintenance up here, and I want to encourage if Greg and David and Eric, if there's anything that you want to weigh in on as these questions come up, don't wait till your presentation, right? Because just want to make sure everybody has whatever it is. Go ahead, ma'am.
Just north of my property, the side channel was built and fish were in there, and then either the funds stopped or October 15th came, and the fish weren't able to get out. So thousands of small fish died. It's pretty stinky. I think plans, whether it's maintenance or whatever, needs to be so that the bottom of the side channel is open so those fish can escape. That did not happen.
That's the objective, is that they're not blind, right? So there's always a connection to the main channel. Where those connections fill with sediment, that's a maintenance need, right? And so we want to make sure we maintain that connectivity. There is, and I don't want to get too far off track, but there are times even in natural systems where fish do get stranded on floodplains. We're designing these floodplains so that they carry water through them throughout the year. So we're really trying to prevent that situation from happening. But there are times in the winter before we can do maintenance, that some of these areas may get
Well,
isolated.
my point isn't maintenance, my point is don't open the side channel until it's finished, so that there is an exit for the fish naturally. They're not smart enough to go backwards. They're not gonna do that, so you lose thousands and thousands.
Yeah, we can talk afterwards about that one particular situation and why I'm pretty sure that occurred, and that's a difference in the construction timing between a piece of that project that was to be built by Sonoma Water and the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Army Corps of Engineers, the time it took for them to complete their project during the course of the summer, they couldn't finish every piece of it in time to have it done.
I'm just wondering, is somebody going to talk about what maintenance is?
Yes.
Maintenance, project maintenance is on the agenda as, so fish monitoring is next, and I wanna track this, I'm gonna stay as long as we're needed, but I also want, to make sure that, for the majority of the people, raise your hand if fish monitoring, believing what we're saying on fish monitoring is your most important reason to be here versus maintenance and other issues.
Well, I think it's
So,
everything.
I know,
For us,
I'm just talking about, like, I'm thinking in my head how much I do 5-minute presentations versus 15-minute and get us to Q&A, right? I'm just doing time management.
Let's do a fast fish.
Yeah, okay, yes, another question.
This is actually just an observation. I'm looking at this, and I know that my box should be yellow. So you could basically draw a line from the top right corner to the bottom left-hand corner and have your successful habitats on the upper left-hand side. Would you agree with that? Yeah, you could roughly draw a line like that. So we're like averaging about 50%. I just wanted to say that because I wanted to be clear, because your presentation seems very slanted towards an optimistic outlook. You haven't used the red color, I notice. You know, you have, the two yellows are very close together, nothing's failing. So I just wanted to just be clear that what I'm seeing is that about half of your habitats are working well.
And I would just counter that, I appreciate that, and even if there's built-in confirmation bias and a desire to prove that this is working or whatever, you know, from my perspective, I'm not managing the project, I'm always trying to watch out to see what I see as right and otherwise. But I also wanna tell you that fair is not bad. The regulators appreciate fair. Like that discussion about your site that says it's a better habitat than it was before means that that's a reason that we have a no jeopardy opinion from the regulators. So, I'm just saying, well, I'll just keep going. I will just say that the assessment that this is, it almost sounds like, I mean, you're saying, it appears that you're dictating this, and I would say it appears that you're discounting what has been a successful project. So who is the boogeyman, right? So let's get there, and we'll go there, but I just want to address that there's a lot of people here in this room that I've talked to who don't believe that what's being presented to them is fair and transparent and real, okay? So I just want to acknowledge that, okay, for everybody. Let's keep going. Richard, you had your hand up and back here.
Could we just go through the presentation?
Yeah, thank you.
As presented, and then we can ask questions afterwards.
Sounds good. But we do have one more. Richard?
Yeah, I just want to say, of course, you understand why it would be surprising to see like 5A, you know, fair.
Yeah.
And, you know, I walked that side channel in October. It's high and dry. It's just, you know, the fish can't use the dry channel. And I also looked at a photograph of exactly a year before that when it had water in it and it just been completed. And so, you know, you can see why it'd be surprising to call it fair when it's dry. So I just, you know, look at both sides.
I have one comment about that. The fish are in the creek year-round. So the wintertime habitat that's provided, almost floodplain space, is valuable for those fish. And so that is, you know, it's a full life cycle perspective of what these fish need in the creek. And right now there's 2,000 cubic feet per second coming out of the dam.
You mean that dry channel will be wet now?
Yes, and
Yeah,
they need a refuge, right? And so not all of these channels work the same way in the summer and the winter. The objective for that channel is for it to be wet all summer long, without question. It's to work in all the seasons. You get only one season now because the project didn't meet its expectations. That doesn't mean it doesn't have value to the juvenile fishing degree.
I want to acknowledge the comment over on the side, which is, I take back what I said earlier. For the individuals who have deep questions, we will need to sit with you afterwards and set up follow-up. For the individuals who are here, who are learning and want the presentation, and not everybody's individual thing, I do want to go through that. So I want to just account for that. So let's go through the presentation, and then on the side, Greg, I would say let's keep it high level on fish, because I think.
So I'm Greg Horton. I'm a principal environmental specialist with Sonoma Water, and I think a lot about fish monitoring and fish monitoring in Dry Creek. And I'm glad David mentioned life cycle before. We do think about life cycle, the complete life cycle of salmon and steelhead, not only in Dry Creek but elsewhere. We've been monitoring fish populations since the late 1990s. And to get an idea of how the habitat enhancements in Dry Creek are working, we look at different life stages, so adults, juveniles, smolts, and we look at different metrics associated with each one of those life stages. And we use a lot of different monitoring methods. I'm not going to go into that. Just some real high-level results. You've seen this map a bunch tonight already. 24 enhancement reaches. And so for our adult monitoring that we do, we have ways of detecting fish moving into those enhancement reaches, and we have ways of including observing fish as they're spawning, but also we have some electronic tags that we can detect those fish moving into those enhancement reaches. So these 24 enhancement reaches, we've been able to monitor 17 of those for the presence of adult salmon and steelhead over the years. So of those, and those are represented by the white boxes there. So of those enhancement reaches, those 17 enhancement reaches that we've been able to evaluate, we found that 12 were used by adults. So again, that's through spawner surveys and observing fish in those habitat enhancement reaches, as well as detecting electronically tagged fish moving into those reaches. So that's sort of one piece of the life cycle. We are seeing salmon and steelhead spawning, pretty widespread in these habitat enhancement reaches. It's a difficult time to observe fish in the wintertime. When you go out there and look at Dry Creek right now, you're not gonna see very far into the water. And this is the time of the year when fish are spawning. And then moving on to juvenile monitoring, juvenile salmon and steelhead monitoring, same map, same idea. These boxes represent places where we've been able to do juvenile salmon and steelhead monitoring. And of the 24 enhancement reaches, that's 21 of them that we've been able to monitor. And of those 21, all of those have been used by salmon and or steelhead based on our monitoring data.
What time of the year is adult, juvenile, and other monitoring?
The adult monitoring occurs basically from November through April, and the juvenile monitoring occurs essentially from June through October, November. Yes?
How do you monitor it, just by looking at the water and looking for the fish, or how do you monitor it?
For adults, that's what we do. From above, we can see salmon red. I don't know if you remember the photo at the very start of the presentation, but there's actually a picture of what's called as salmon red. A red is just a nest. It's a place where an excavation that fish dig, and then they lay their eggs in that excavation and bury the eggs. So we can see those excavations. We can see when fish are digging those reds. And then for juveniles, it's a little bit more it's a little bit more than that. We actually go out there with a seine or electrofishing gear or snorkeling. There's different methods we use to actually observe the fish.
And the tagging, great.
And tagging, yes, and electronic tagging. We do a lot of tagging, both the hatchery and fish that are out there at large, living in Dry Creek and these habitat enhancement beaches.
And do you have students from like UC System do that for you?
We don't typically use students. We have kind of an army of seasonal workers that help us do that work.
Okay.
It's actually for a lot of people. Go ahead, Mel.
How many coho made it to the fish hatchery last year?
It was over 200. I don't know the number off the, do you know, Eric? Do you know what the number was?
It was over 200,
Yeah.
260 something.
Chinook.
Lots of Chinook.
If you go out, I went out with them one time on kayak where they do a survey, with Dave and a couple others, and where they visually track and take down. It's pretty amazing to see Chinook salmon this big flooded in a section. It feels like you're in a National Geographic when it really does happen. Let's keep going.
Okay, so yeah, we have seen juvenile coho in steelhead and or steelhead in all of these breaches. And a lot of those fish are of natural origin, and we know that from the lack of a tag or lack of a mark. That there's ways that we can determine whether a fish is from natural origin or from the hatchery. Of course, this hatchery produces and releases lots and lots of hatchery fish, but we've determined that about 77% of those are from natural reproduction. So again,
77% that come back are from natural?
77 that we found, 77% of the juveniles that we found, that we caught in these habitat enhancement reaches were of natural origin, meaning that their parents spawned in the wild and their offspring from those parents that spawned in the wild. Growth is also very, very good in these habitat enhancement reaches. It's actually about 3 times higher than it is in other tributaries during the summertime, which is a testament to the fact that there's cold water, good habitat now with the habitat enhancement reaches, so those fish can really take advantage of that. Now, juvenile to smolt survival, this is sort of a newish way for us to get at the survival of these fish that are rearing, so they're growing, living in these habitat enhancement reaches. We want to know how well they're surviving to the smolt stage. So to get at that, we actually have installed these, what we call net pens or release boxes in some of the off-channel habitats that we've constructed. We release fish into those boxes, let them acclimate for a few days, and then open the door and let them out. And the idea is that fish are coming from a hatchery, being released into a net pen where things are pretty safe. Survival is going to be really high. They're going to get used to their surroundings, and then we open the door, and we hope that they're staying in these side channels. And in fact, we've done this in several different locations over the years, and we've had very good results from that. We've seen pretty high survival. It takes about 6 months from the time those fish are released in the fall until they smolt the following spring. So say October, November, they're released into the net pens, and then March, April, May, those fish are leaving the smolt. So we've seen really good survival of those fish over the winter, over that 6-month period. It's actually better than many of the other locations where we're doing the same sort of thing in other tributaries of the Western River watershed.
Can I ask a conceptual question? So we have a hatchery. We also have naturally spawning up and down the creek. We have juvenile to smolt to adult returns that we manage. Are all of these activities that we do to support all of those stages?
Absolutely.
Is that part of the overall biological opinion? It's that you don't just act as the nursery, I think, as we've called these tributaries.
Well,
At a certain point, or.
there's a broad coho salmon recovery effort in the watershed that's guided from a technical standpoint by the National Marine Fisheries Service, DFW, Sonoma Waters, and very involved in that, other entities as well. So that group is always thinking about the complete life cycle. They're always thinking about, minimizing hatchery and natural origin, impacts. So there's a lot of care and a lot of thought given to that very question. So another part of the story is these fish survived in the smolt stage. How do they survive when they're leaving Dry Creek? And again, kind of a newish technique or approach. We've used these acoustic tags for the last 4 or 5 years to get at survival as those fish are migrating. So the idea is we release acoustic tag fish. They're tagged in the hatchery. They're hatchery origin fish. They're smolts. We tag them, let them go just downstream of where we're sitting here tonight. And then those fish make that 45 or so mile journey out to the ocean. And by putting these receivers in the water at various strategically located points, we can actually measure or estimate their survival on their way out. And what we found is that fish leaving Dry Creek are surviving at a nice high rate. Average 90% of them are making it out of Dry Creek, as compared to the Russian River, it's only about half that. So I think, I guess I'll just on the wrap-up slide, we have seen that the fish are able to complete their life cycle in Dry Creek. I think there's very clear evidence of that. And it's actually encouraged the agencies, I think, as has been mentioned a couple times tonight, to sort of relax some of the more stringent flow requirements that were initially laid out in the original biological opinion. That's all I have.
Okay. Yes, ma'am?
I think many of us think the count is very important, and because it's indicative of what is success and what is damaging to the fish. So thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Eric McDermott, Senior Environmental Specialist at Sonoma Water, and unfortunately, my supervisor, Dave Cook, who put this presentation together, he couldn't be here tonight. He got whatever cred's been going around this holiday season, so he said, "You got this, do your best." So I got it, and I think you guys are all interested in, you're gonna have a lot of questions about this portion. I do think some of your questions will get answered throughout my talk, so maybe I'm gonna hold off on some of them if that's okay, unless there's some really pertinent ones that come up. But I ran through this earlier with somebody and like, oh yeah, you caught some of them just a little later in your talk. So bear with me, when I get through this, we'll all look together. So Dry Creek construction that ended in 2024. So last year we started to implement what's now the Dry Creek Habitat Enhancement Maintenance Program. There's been more construction going on, maintaining these projects. So it's kind of a twofold approach, two purposes to this, which are to maintain these constructed habitats that we've built out there, but also adaptively manage them to benefit the rearing salmon and steelhead that are in them. And these habitats being the side channels, the alcoves, that consist of these log structures, ripples for grade control, boulders that get input, things that have been talked about this evening. To go along with this and to accomplish this, there's a slew of regulations and permits we have to abide by and acquire. Due to working in aquatic and wetland habitats, we're procuring permits from both the federal side and the state side, from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer, Water Quality Control Board, and California Department of Fish and Wildlife on the state side. And then because we're dealing with sensitive fish and wildlife species, we're also adhering to the Federal Endangered Species Act, the California Endangered Species Act, as well as the Migratory Bird Act, right? Not just fish are using these sites. Birds are using it too, mice are using it too, all sorts of stuff are using these sites. We're focusing on fish though tonight, right? So maintenance activities, what do they really consist of? Well, it's gonna be focused around the constructed habitat features that we've built. So again, not just features meaning the logs, but the actual whole side channels themselves. Primarily, I think you guys all get the gist of this and some of your concerns, but that's gonna be sediment removal, right? That these sites are filling in, we need to make sure they still have flow, fish can use them, so that's kind of the primary objective for all of the maintenance activities. But also, where needed, bank repair, structure repair, if any of those are starting to fail, and then vegetation management, I'll get on that in a little bit here, and also nuisance debris removal that might be out there. So the process that we're gonna approach to this maintenance program, our kind of annual look at it, if you start from like right now, we're gonna say, man, we need the water to lower down, because right now all these sites look great, they're all full of water, but we know that's not the case in the summertime, right? So come early spring, we're hoping this March, April time span, once rains are done, the large rainstorm events that cause those high flows, and then also once high flow dam releases are done. That's what we're seeing right now. This isn't a natural rain event. The reason why dry creeks like this, they're releasing water from that flood pool that was explained earlier in the dam. So once all those reside in come early spring, we're hoping March, April, we're gonna go out there and we're gonna assess these sites. That month, shortly after, the next month, we're gonna prioritize our maintenance needs. What do all the sites look like? Those 24 different reaches that we have out here, where does the work need to be done, and how can we prioritize this? We're still working on this, folks, right? We just transitioned to the maintenance program, so I'm describing to you our thought process, how we're figuring this all out. Then we're gonna coordinate with landowners once we pick those places that we do need to do this work. Prepare a work plan and notification, not just for the landowners, but also for the regulatory agencies we need to work with, that I explained earlier, who we're obtaining our permits from. And then in the summertime, that's what's been said tonight a couple times, that's that June 15th through October 15th window where we're gonna actually perform that maintenance out there. All that is, again, kind of weather dependent too during that work window, and if we can push it on the latter end.
And we, how does it work for, how much of a budget we're allocated for maintenance projects need versus the budget? Because unlike the Army Corps budget, which has to be for federal procurement, and it's all this other side, we pay for this, we as in the royal we, because I don't know the answer to this, out of funding that comes from the water contractors, those who purchase the water.
It's correct, so.
Pay for their dues, and they have to pay higher, well, they have to pay higher water rates if you're in Santa Rosa or whatever, or in these other areas, because we have to do this regulatory project. It's a very unique thing because those water retailers, we are a wholesaler, not a retailer, there is a natural tension and even battle that is navigated every year because they don't want to spend more money up in these reaches. They would like cheap water for their residents.
So the funding comes from, you're perfectly right, that's sort of half the story is from our rates. So we have a surcharge for our customers that pay for the maintenance of these projects. Some of the projects that were constructed with Sonoma Water funding, taking advantage of the Warm Springs Dam tax override, which is for the maintenance, the operations of Warm Springs Dam. We tap into some of those monies. Those monies come from a property tax assessment that all property owners in Sonoma County pay. So
whether you live out here or whether on my property tax bills, I open it up, it says 1% for my domicile, and then it says Warm Springs Dam, and then it says the school bonds that we've passed and anything in my area.
Right, so it's a combination of those monies. We estimate what the expenditures are to be every year, split the monies between those two sources, and we propose that. We propose that to our customers. And
our customers are the retailers.
Exactly.
Which have a group called the Water Advisory Council, which are our contractors, and they meet monthly.
Yes.
Right?
Every month.
And meet in Santa Rosa at their public works yard.
And
then there's another group,
we
which is the
present
Technical Advisory Council. So the Water Advisory Council, you sit there and there's a representative from the county, which is currently David Rabbit. I was it for many years. And then there's a member from pretty much every city council from those cities that are contractors. And then the staff leads, the administrators are on a technical advisory council. Go ahead.
All right, awesome. So moving forward here, maintenance example of what we did this last year. So last year, just a couple days ago, 2025. But we selected two different reaches, or two different enhancement side channels. They both resided within Reach 8 of Dry Creek. And I want to give you an example of the work that was done at one of them, the larger scale project that we did perform this last summer. So it was a side channel. It was actually constructed, its current configuration was constructed in 2017, so quite a while ago. It's roughly 1,000 feet long, comprised of lots of wood structures, a couple grade control riffles throughout it, and it was found throughout many of the years of its existence be very beneficial rearing habitat for juvenile coho and steelhead. This is a particular site I know was on all those green lists that both Neil was showing and also Greg was showing with fish usage of both adults and juveniles. So the maintenance need here, that's what the inlet looked like this last summer after the 24-25 winter that we had, large flows, high dam releases. And so it was sedimented in. Roughly 850 feet of that 1,000-foot long channel had become almost essentially dry. And in the 24-25 winter, early on, this very, very, very large log had come down Dry Creek in some of the larger flows we've seen out there and happened to lodge itself right at the inlet. That log heavily exacerbated the deposition that was coming in, forcing flow to come in and actually shunt itself towards the left bank there, which was potentially going to cause an unstable bank. It hadn't gotten to that point yet. Spoiler alert, we cut it off. I'll show you that photo. And then, so that was a big need to get that out of there. That was one of the big problems at that site that was causing it. So we don't just go in there and start to do this work. Again, like I said, all the regulatory compliance we have to abide by. So before getting out there to do any of this, to avoid and to minimize our disturbance to fish and wildlife, we perform a number of surveys. Those include what you see up here, active nesting surveys, roosting bat surveys, the foothill yellow-legged and California red-legged frog surveys, northwestern pond surveys, turtle surveys, and then the fish surveys. Fish surveys being kind of one of our key ones, and that was one of the surveys we did have to act on this year at that site. So we performed a fish rescue. Along that 850 feet of dry, sedimented channel, there was a small isolated pool. And when we went to evaluate that isolated pool, which we're going to need to drive tractors through, do work around, anything in it is probably not going to make it through the end of the maintenance period. We noticed there were fish there. We went in, did a fish rescue. We removed roughly 200 different individuals. Of those, over 100 were salmoniid species that we're trying to save and we're trying to give a good life due to this project. So actually 90 of them were juvenile coho, which is great to see them actually using it, not great to see them trapped there. 2 of them juvenile Chinook salmon and 11 of them juvenile steelhead. Those were removed from that dry, or from the dry channel isolated pool, and they were relocated to suitable habitat in main stem, where they could actually survive. If we had not gone in and done that, those would have been, 103 listed species there that would have been imperiled this last year. We removed those. That allowed us to get in there, and right here you can see that was actually the isolated pool left over. There was a little bit of veg hanging over it, so that allowed us then to get equipment in there, continue to do some vegetation management. This might look a little bit rough. A little rough here in these images. I'll show you in a couple more. Might get drag the point home a little bit, but again, this channel was built in 2017. We just performed maintenance in 2025. That's 8 years later. We're looking at 8 years of vegetation growth that we have to combat with here to get in and do this work. So those access routes that we developed to do these initial builds and hope that are there for maintenance, they had grown vegetation back in, so it was a need to go in and remove a little bit of vegetation so equipment could get in so we could perform this maintenance.
This site is just south of Druid-Hurst, right?
This site is the former Druid-Hurst site, correct, now it's currently ASCII, yes. So vegetation maintenance, vegetation management was done, again, so we could access the site, and then so tractors, trucks, off-haul vehicles could get into the channel and actually drive up and down so that we were minimizing any extra disturbance to the surrounding area. And then once we cleared that pool, once we were able to drive up and down the channel, we got up to the inlet, we were able to chop up that log there. Again, reminder, that log was increasing the potential or the deposition that you can see right there. That's all the sediment that blocked it up. And the potential for future debris racking, and again, it was shunting flow towards the side of the channel. We didn't want it to go, so we really needed to get that out there. And then that allowed, once the fish were removed, once they could get in clear vegetation, once they removed that log, that allowed for equipment to get in and remove the sediment. Over the course of around 6 weeks, roughly 3,000 cubic yards of sediment removed from this side channel. And
Which truck was it that?
depends on the size of truck they brought in. That's what we answered. That truck right there, I believe, is roughly those. They were only putting around 8 yards of sediment in, due to a lot of this sediment is saturated and very wet and heavy. So it's a matter of how much that. They can't load these trucks all the way up. No, they could if it was bone dry sediment that was coming out, but this was not. It's a lot of wet sediment. Yes.
What happens to the sediment?
One,
What do you do with it?
2. There we go. Next slide. So debris disposal. What do we do with all this stuff? What do we do with the vegetation? What do we do with the sediment that comes out of the channel? This similar manner in which the construction phase of Dry Creek project happened, And now we're continuing to follow that through with the maintenance phase, and that is any vegetation that gets removed from the site, if it's appropriate, we want to reuse it on site. We could put that into a log structure that could be falling apart. A tree that comes down could be beneficial habitat, cover for fish that are there. So if it's appropriate, we'll try to reuse that on site. If not, it's going to get off-hauled to the nearest green waste recycling facility. And then with the sediment that gets done, that's a similar case for it. Again, if appropriate to get reused on site, we haven't found that to be very successful in the past, but there are certain circumstances on where a little bit of material here, a little bit of material there can get reused and be a beneficial use within the side channel.
I'll also say that there's a, we had a meeting, God, fires and crap, but probably, I'd say it's probably 5 or 6 years ago here, where there was a ton of concern, first time I had heard about it, that we were taking sediment, which included gravel, and we were taking it and trying to get rid of it in the easiest way possible, which is we would pay the tens of thousands of dollars to fill up the trucks and move it, but we were dropping it off at the gravel companies, and then they would reuse it and sell it. And that is definitely the cheapest option for us. One of the things that at some point, I don't know, Dawn or Rob, if you all want to address this, but Dave and I talked about this also today, is that there are needs for sediment, goods, natural sediment. If you can think about this disruption of what they call a conveyor belt, like, the rocks fall down from the hills, they come in, they travel down. They also are not just an encumbrance and a negative thing, but they're a positive thing. We have some projects with Riverkeeper and the county and others like Hanson, it's the old gravel pits that need sediment.
Suggest, I know this is not possible, but the sediment that you take out, you should put it at the foot of the dam, let the river use it again.
Yes?
Yeah, I was wondering, how much lower are the creeks from the work and the maintenance and digging out of gravel than they were when you started the project?
We have some slides that can speak to that. The answer is there hasn't been. What you might imagine is sort of overall continued degradation of the stream channel. And Neil, as a geomorphologist, is the expert to explain that. And Neil, if you would like to, Eric, if you're down through some of your slides, maybe he can speak to that.
Oh no, dude, you got your show. You can't give up yet. Tell us what you got left.
We'll go where the crowd wants to go.
What do you have?
I got about 6 slides left. I can wrap it up in 6 minutes.
And then if we can hold that question, I think Neil is perfectly.
And then Neil will come
doesn't-
back up.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like sediment is gonna be a big option for us in terms of conversations. Where it goes, how it's used, other things. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you're right there, Brian, is that we do want to give the first priority to the landowner. That is material we're removing from somebody's property. So we want to speak to that person first and foremost and ask them if they do have a use for that sediment. If they do, we're happy to stockpile it for that individual, as long as that comes along with an agreed signed release of liability on how the future use of that gravel or sediment, whatever it may be, is going to be used, and is no longer on some water contractors' shoulders for responsibility. And if that said landowner does not want what that sediment is or comprised of, then it will be treated just like the vegetation if it can't be used on site, which will be off-hauled to the nearest recycling facility, of which Sonoma Water does pay for that fee to take it to. I can tell you that almost all of the sediment that was removed, all those 3,000 cubic yards that got taken out of the site this last year, went to Sire Industries down in Healdsburg. That is the nearest disposal site, so that saved everybody the most amount of money for that material that did get disposed of this year. So the other thing that we did there at this site was a little bit of bank protection work. Again, this is where I was referring to, just downstream of the inlet, there was the potential, if things continue to rack up at that inlet structure, that water could be shunted flows into this bank. So this was a preventative measure. This bank was not failing. This is just if it does happen, we saw this lining up again only this last year out of the 8 years this side channel's been around. We noticed this, but why not do some preventative efforts while we have the equipment in there that can handle this? So that effort took place this last year. A couple quick before and after photos of this particular site. There's before, didn't quite get it before they sawed up that big log, but that's what it looked like right before. You got about almost 8 feet in some areas of sediment that came in. Again, that was just the last 2 years. The first 5.5 years this site existed, everything was fine, flowing, and great. Those last 2 or 3 big winter years, which filled the dam up, had those high flow releases, are what caused this sediment input and this site to dry up. Here's on the left-hand panel here, you're looking at that isolated pool, heavily covered in vegetation, starting to get sediment in, very shallow. Those fish were not going to survive very much longer. We got them out of there, and that's a photo on the left. On the right-hand side, taken from the exact same spot. We now have that wide open channel. Those flows, that depth, those velocity criterias that Neil was mentioning, Greg and Neil mentioned earlier that we're looking for. So now ideal habitat for any fish that do want to use this side channel. And one thing to point out here, this channel, again, we're looking at about 8 years of vegetation growth. This channel was built in a field. It was built in an actual field. There wasn't a single tree or anything around really for there to be there. You give it water, it's going to grow. That's what we're dealing with here. If you let things sit too long, vegetation does become an issue for some of our plants out there. So looking forward, what do we anticipate in 2026? Again, last year, 2025, was our first year of kind of bringing forward with this maintenance program. And there were more sites than we could handle and that we could acquire permits for in the locations that work needed to be done this last year. We got done what we could with our resources and what the permits would allow. That being said, there were 3 more that we would have loved to have got to this last year, but did not. So right now we already know that's on the docket for 2026. Those sites reside within reaches 4, 5, and 10. And then again, those need to be ground truth this spring. So come March, April, May, whenever these flows are going to receive, and we can actually go look at them. Things probably will have changed over the winter, and then we don't know how things are going to change with other sites also over the winter. So we'll be evaluating all of them and then deciding where maintenance is going to occur this next year. What do we anticipate doing at these 3 sites? Very minor tree trimming. Again, that's usually just for some access to rehab the original routes that we could get into the sites and make it enough just for equipment to be able to swing and excavate materials and work within the project area. Maybe fish rescue if it's needed. Again, we're not going to know until things, flows come down and things start to dry up. And then again, primarily it's going to be a sediment removal effort. Here's an example of one of the sites we're going to go to. It's 4C. It was constructed in 2024 was when it was completed. And the 2024 to 2025 winter, rather large water year, a lot of high flow releases from the dam, and that resulted in that red circle there that you can see, which is the side channel, the upper inlets to it. What we've estimated, this was again last summer, it looked like roughly around 1,000 cubic yards of material that had accumulated there and plugged 1.5, almost 2 of those inlets to this side channel. And so if we could get rid of that, that would be ideal to get this thing properly functioning and have that back that we needed there. So again, we're going to go out, we're going to evaluate those sites, and then we'll develop these annual notifications. These notification maps, this is one that I've been working on for next year already. We may need to expand this depending on what it looks like after flows come down. But these are going to be worked out. We'll go out and meet with the landowner, make sure our staging areas are appropriate, make sure our access areas are appropriate, go over the scope of work. It's kind of a similar fashion to how the planning of the project was done in the first place in coordination with landowners. And then we'll be presenting these to regulatory agencies for their review prior to our work window. And we hope all of that can be accomplished before that June 15th date, right? So we can hit the ground running and we can get all the time we need during the summer to accomplish as much as possible. So I wanted to end my talk. I know we have a lot of questions we want to go over, but I started my career here at Sonoma Water roughly 16, 17 years ago as a total fish nerd, right? Kind of evolved into other projects since then, but I know this is a familiar photo you guys have looked at. I just wanted to show this. I love it because this is that Asthete, now formerly Truitt side channel that we opened up, and it's really hard to tell on this photo for folks over there, but right there in that light spot out here, that's this light spot out here. This is the inlet to the side channel, about 15 feet away from where we just completed construction. It was about 10 days later, we had adult salmon coming back, and that's their nest, that's their red right there. Multiple salmon were spawning right at the inlet to the side channel. Makes me feel good knowing that we had 6 weeks of construction going on just 15 feet away. That did not discourage the fish from coming back. This spawning riffle happened to be a very prominent spawning riffle in the Dry Creek system historically, and it still is to this day. It's nice to see that that project, over the 8, 9 years of existence in its multiple stages, has not affected the main stem right there and fish using it. And the other thing that makes me feel good about this photo is the fact that all of those juvenile fish, they're going to be born inside that red right there. They'll have the opportunity to get out of those high flows right there. You've got thousands of juveniles, and they can possibly come right into that now currently open side channel. And if they're a coho or a steelhead, they need to reside there in this stream for the next year, year and a half before they go out to the ocean. So they have the prime opportunity right there, and that will be our progeny for future fish stocks. So we love to see that. Love to see the fish coming back and not being that affected by it.
Excuse me.
Very soon.
Just go through a couple, first of all, you, sir, and then Paul.
So how burdensome is the regulatory process to do a specific study for these very small sites and get permits on that? Is that something they give you quickly an answer, or is it something you have to argue? They send inspectors? I mean, this could slow down the work.
You're absolutely right, it can slow down the work. It is quite the process. It's not just a simple phone call and approval. This can last months, many, many months. So that was something.
So each little piece of.
So depending on what permit, so currently what we're working on are larger scale, long-term permits.
Right, that I understand when you do the whole thing, but for every maintenance project to have that burden seems excessive.
Yes, so moving into the maintenance phase of the Dry Creek project, we're working on longer-term 5-year permits. So this won't be an annual thing that we'll be crossing our fingers hoping we can get approved in time. This is something this winter we've been working on really, really hard, and we're being told by the departments that are approving them, we should have that by this summer. And so those things will hold for many years coming out. So it shouldn't be that waiting game of can we get it. We were playing that waiting game the last couple of years. Again, in that transitionary period of this is a large scale construction project, it's ended, now we're moving into maintenance. The needs are slightly different.
I would add contextually that all of the issues that we face in Dry Creek exist because of the dam. Also, there's other creeks up here, as we all know, along the Dry Creek watershed that do not have a dam. On the main stem of the Russian River, the wicked irony is that none of those concerns or issues in those areas are being addressed because there's no project, AKA the Water Agency and the Army Corps, doing that. There is no, so it's very difficult because when you talk about sedimentation, what we would call hungry water, water that takes sedimentation from upstream and deposits it downstream, is on the mainstream. I deal with groups just like this with the Alexander Valley Association that we inherently cannot touch. So we have properties where we're losing not just a little bit of banks, where we're losing 10 plus acres. And then we're going into down in the Corvell property, over on the Munsell property, we're at risk of losing a bridge, the Geyserville Bridge, that is a $60 million bridge. I don't say that for anything other than we are basically mandated by this regulation to play God. I just want to acknowledge that. Manage this, move this, create a structure that can self-sustain, and if it can't self-sustain, move this, move it over here, show that it works. Here's your main, you have to manage the budget to do it. And to me, there's this also on the other side. I deal with the sad reality that like on the main stem of the Russian River, the majority of the creeks that connect with the Russian River are so encumbered by gravel that they don't even connect anymore. It's a very weird thing because I just want to let you know that the strange thing is that even though this benefits fish within this project and it benefits the whole system of the Russian River, there is no regulation that tries to achieve a healthy Russian River. That's why Riverkeeper and me and the Russian River Confluence and all these other things that we do are to try and like get there too. So just as you know that there's other stuff going on. Questions, I know in the back, ma'am, and then Doug after that. Yeah.
What was that last property you showed? Is that a seat?
Where the fish was spawning? Yes, that was that channel right there has where people are familiar with those red tasting chairs, which they just painted a different color now. So the black tasting chairs, I believe there.
Pardon me?
They changed their chair color from red to black.
Right.
Yes, yes. That's right there where you can walk down and see the section.
Quick question. I love your passion about the fish. Can you estimate how much sediment you've taken over the last 10, 15 years of the project?
Well, I mean, that'd be a great question. Maybe Greg could chime in on all the other maintenance projects that have been done during the construction phases, but since post-construction, so post-2024, maintenance work that's been done post-2024.
Post-2016.
Well,
14.
And that's where maybe Greg can chime in with what those other ones. I'm just saying the 2 projects that have actually been done since we've gone into the maintenance phase have only removed 3,500 cubic yards. So that was the large scale one we did, and there was a smaller scale one just downstream, which was roughly 500 cubic yards. So
You're talking about the initial construction as well, Doug.
Oh, so there was none for 4 years?
No, there were a few maintenance efforts that were done before these maintenance efforts.
Are you talking about all the sediment from the very beginning of the project from 2012, every initial construction plus?
After the construction, yeah.
After
Or
construction.
So not related to construction, but related to repairs, maintenance, fixing, yeah.
I mean, that wouldn't be that much, because a few of our maintenance activities, we put the sediment back, we didn't even take it away. So, you know, I would say in terms of just maintenance, I don't know, 10,000 cubic yards or something like that. I mean, we took it out of Truett-Hurst or Steve. We really didn't remove any from 5A, right? Didn't we?
Right, we didn't
Put
remove
all
any.
that and kind of side casted it. For cost reasons, we didn't remove any from the Reach 4 area. So-
Side casting out of the stream or
Yeah.
back into the stream?
Well, you're in the floodplain, so you're in between the high terraces of the vineyard, and you've got the channels down, you know, within the floodplain where we cut them. So you just take it out and put it back in the floodplain next to where you're at in there. So it's still accessible to the river once it's up again. So yeah, as far as off hauling, I mean, we haven't had permits. We still don't have the programmatic permit that we need to really do this project in a broad, wide scale and maintain these things. So there's a lot of constraints.
When
And
he
one of
says a
the keeps us-
programmatic permit, a way to translate that is an ongoing flowing permit. I'm using, I guess, water words, adjectives, flowing permit. Instead of having to get a permit every year to do it, you get a programmatic permit that allows it for 5 or 10 years or whatever subscribed within that to be able to do that. We have programmatic permits in our central Sonoma County flood control areas that reduced flooding and were created in the 30s and 40s and 50s from Santa Rosa and other areas, so that you can actually go in and do vegetation management and sediment management without going through the list that you went through, right? And that's one of the things, I mean, just for context, I brought forward an item that was $1.2 million to basically do a study to build towards us getting a programmatic permit in the area where the Geyserville Bridge is and on the main stem of the Russian River. Because now that, okay, stop me if you, what I've learned anecdotally and through history is that this area of Sonoma County, Dry Creek and Alexander Valley are the only 2 areas, and Don, you've educated me and others have, and even farmers like Rancho Rico. These areas are 2 of the only areas, other than on the upper west county, that do not have a flood control district in Sonoma County. When we created flood control districts in the 30s, landowners had to pay in to decide if they were going to pay an assessment vote to create a district in their backyard. And so throughout Sonoma County, if you look at Sonoma County flood control districts, so since the 30s, all these other areas have flood control districts. The reason that the, Alexander Valley and the main reach of Sonoma County, of the river in there, does not have a flood control district was because there was active companies working in gravel extraction. But even before that, the Army Corps of Engineers had channelized that. So people said, what the hell? Why should I tax myself to do a flood management if the Army Corps of Engineers is already channelized and this water's flying out of here? And then after that, the companies that were doing gravel, they could get permits at that time, and that's where the gravel wars started. And they would go in and basically manage the river. So if you talk to the old school gravel miners, they believe, many of them, it's fascinating, they talk about their gravel empires, but they also are like, they'll tell me like, oh, when we did that, the river was a lot better, right? When we were scooping out of the river, okay? So now though, with the Endangered Species Act, the Environmental Quality Act, all these other things, now you can't touch those things like we're doing here without a substantial amount of work. And in the mainstream of the river, we do not have a tax base that's paying for water that allows us to have a maintenance program to manage it, right? So those are the things that long-term, actually my colleague Supervisor Linda Hawkins and I have a committee, even though it's my last year, to work on what we would call Russian River governance. Like the fact that this water agency, how they manage water, can at times be at odds with how my health department has to monitor algae can be at odds with how the permitting department manages or infrastructure manages. And it's not because of intention, it's because there is never, some of these things are just, the reason you go, God, that just lacks common sense, is because no one was ever put in charge of managing it. And so all of a sudden you wake up and everybody wants you to fix it, but then they don't want to be inconvenienced by the fix. That's kind of what I have learned. Like, that's not good enough. But I just take us back. That's context. I want to, Neil, you were going to go through a little bit of what I think what David had mentioned, but
Yeah.
I also want to address right now, we're at 8 p.m. If individuals are full, you can leave, right? We've videoed this so we can share it. We'll find a way to be able to share it to people who couldn't come. The other thing from my side is what I'm really interested in terms of follow-up discussions is not coming and doing the same presentation every year, but sediment and vegetation, landowner, opportunity, and then the desired beneficial use, ultimately, which is you pull the stuff out of the river, put it to a good use. I've heard from people that they don't like it being dropped off at a gravel company's site for them to sell, okay? So that's one thing that we have talked about, and we need to have follow-up conversations with you all, and that's commitment. The other thing for me, which is a real one that many people have talked about, that you mentioned, that I've been on tours, is the people whose land is disappearing because of these hungry waters. And the strange thing is that there's other people who are in this project, who might not be here right now, who the reason they signed up, like maybe you don't have one of these sites, but you're losing your ground. The reason they signed up was so that we would protect their land and their house downstream, right? Because try going and getting a permit to throw a bunch of rocks on the side. So I know 4 or 5 landowners who are part of this project that the reason they did it was so that they could protect their land from erosion, right? Which is a wicked irony, I'll just say as well.
But it's a lack of foresight too, as to what happens upstream when this happens downstream.
And it gets back to the point about beneficial use. Do you put the sediment back into the system? Do you take it down and put it into other areas?
And do you consider not continuing to maintain certain sites that repetitively fill up?
Yep.
Because it's just amounts to gravel extraction.
Well, and I would just say, I'd love an answer on that, but also the strange thing of this is what we're able to inform those who regulate us to manage. There's a separate section of this biological opinion is that we were forced to manage the opening and closing of the estuary down at Jenner. Like, not let it open and then let it open because down there the fish pool. And everybody has their own opinion, but many people feel that has been a failure, right? That was we do good work there, but for us to go and open and close it, and then what happens is people's houses start to flood, so you get some West County cowboys and others that just go down and take a shovel and do it when the regulatory agency has told us to manage, you know what I mean? Anyways, I think, so I want to keep going further, but for anybody, I think for me the follow-up is really this beneficial use management issue is a big key.
Jay's up. A lot of this is probably going to be leaving at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
I just hats off to the Dry Creek Association who pulled this together and informed the neighbors. I don't remember getting anything from the Sonoma Water Agency about this meeting. I'm one of the original landowners. In fact, 15 years ago, I was on the Dry Creek board and actually met with a lot of the landowners and convinced them that the water agency was full of good people, including NIMS and all these other agencies that landowners and farmers didn't want to talk to. And it's been too long since you guys have presented, so some of the tension and some of the issues and some of the answers that aren't getting answered today by all these neighbors who are incredible people that have helped make this project happen. It's really incumbent upon the water agency, and David, I know you guys really want to do the right thing, and Greg, you guys have your heart in the right place to get fish restored, but you guys really need to communicate more with all of us here, more consistently, provide reports, just communicate. And today was great, before the pandemic, you guys were doing a good job communicating, at least I felt that way in the early years. But my ear's been burning just in the last eyes and ears, and we're gonna be supporting you in funding, voting, and everything else you need to get monies here. But please communicate more with everyone in this room. That's what's needed.
Challenge accepted. Yeah, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to follow up on that, which is that I understood that the policy currently of Sonoma Water is to communicate with the landowner who you have a vested interest over their land now, only when the communication seems to have directly to do with their land. However, we're dealing with a river, and the property lines don't indicate the limits of where your activities affect and don't affect the other property owners. And so I think that criteria for notice and conversation needs to be reconsidered. Anytime you're doing something on the river and you're excavating up to 3,000 yards of gravel, it affects everybody on the river, potentially. So, you know, it's not just about, well, we're not doing anything on your parcel today, so we're not gonna talk to you. That's really not a reasonable approach in that context. And in the beginning, when you guys were beating the bushes, trying to generate interest, you know, broad outreach was totally understandable because you were trying to grow some grassroots support. Right now, you have people who you're in contract with, who you communicate with anytime you wanna access their land or do construction or maintenance. It would be no big deal for you to email that list of people a notice for a meeting like this. And just to ask, while I have your attention, when is the next meeting going to be, do you know?
No.
You don't have any idea?
I can commit to working with the Dry Creek Valley Association and putting, I think both a meeting and both sharing this, and then also, once again, challenge accepted, same thing. I think also sharing of information, not just sending reports, but like whether it's newsletter or quarterly or other things like that. I think what we need to do is have a renewed discussion. And I'll just say, kind of as the discussion happened, unfortunately, a lot of conversations are, I wish it wasn't so many of these conversations post-COVID and fires where we just kind of all freaking, I'm not asking for an excuse, but where everything disappeared from what was before. So I think this is a call to action. I consider this as not calling you out, but calling you in, as you mentioned, and as others have said. As a landowner and as us, we want to be partners, we want to be included, we want to be informed, we want to ask questions, and we don't want you to fear that, right? Richard?
Yeah, so there's this kind of simple picture. You said this was kind of a field, you created this 1,000-foot side channel by taking out gravel. And then 7 or 8 years later, it had filled in with gravel. That gravel came from somewhere upstream. So now the maintenance is to go in and take out that gravel again. And it only makes sense that it will fill in again. And then we take that gravel out again. And Yael started this before the presentation with the idea that, and again, I'm with the Dry Creek Valley Association, the idea that our organization was founded on this issue back when commercial gravel mining was taking place, and acreage of land was subsiding into the creek, and it was viewed as a direct result of the taking of gravel downstream, and then upstream from that, the land would begin to subside. So this is one of the concerns, is that we're basically a form of gravel mining to maintain these channels, to create the channel, and then to go in and maintain them. So that's and the damage that will be occurring upstream to people's land due to this extraction of gravel. And not just in one place, but in these various areas, all of the different parts within the creek.
So I think we should let Neil, if we can, briefly address that. We know that's a concern, and I'll cut to the chase. The data doesn't show us that that's occurring, and I think Neil should get a chance to explain how we monitor that, and how you explain that process.
I do just really quick want to make reference that I was trying my best in my portion of this talk to refrain from just using the word gravel. A lot of the material that does come out of here, sediment, it is not great reusable materials. The other site that I didn't present on tonight, everything that was taken out was a form of some black anoxic sludge. It's not good for fish to be using it. It's not good for any sort of water quality measurements out there. It's not good for land use. It needs to be gotten rid of out of there. It's not reusable, so.
But it does plug that hole that you guys made.
Well, I think let's let Neil talk a little bit about it. We are monitoring the creek and its geomorphology pretty closely.
So this is the steep site that Eric was just speaking about. So, and where Eric saw the red was right about here. So this is our survey that we did shortly after we did the maintenance work that Eric just described. So this is all of our mapping. So that's topography. That's the channel. And if we strip away the water, what we can actually do is zero in on the inlet, which is where if you're extracting gravel and if you extract the gravel and create like a nick point, you would expect to see propagation upstream from that nick point. So what we did was took our data from 2016, from when the project started, until 2025, October 2025, and we did what's called a long profile. And so you basically just draw a line and then you plot the elevations along that profile. And so this profile goes from just downstream of the inlet is on the left there, about 130 feet upstream. And so, again, this is the elevation on the y-axis and then the distance on the x. And so here is the basic profile of that main stem right here as feet in 2016. This is pre-project. And so the ending elevation, about 100 feet upstream of the inlet is 141.9 feet. And we monitor this over time. And so right above the inlet, we have some boulders up here that actually increase the bed elevation, create grade so water goes into the side channel. And so that elevation, that same elevation, that same point of the stream was almost identical, 141.94. A year later, 141.83. In 2019, it's raised a little bit, but we're talking tenths of feet. And then in 2024, it was 142.2. And just the other day, we measured it 2025, 142.3 feet. So we're not seeing any kind of upward, headward incision originating from that side channel. And we don't see it at all propagating from our side channel. So that's within our side channel. So we do not see that propagating upstream from our inlets.
But so sediment, where does it come from and why is it accumulating where we remove it? I mean, what would be the fate if we didn't remove it?
I mean, we see aggregation, sediment deposition within our side channels. I showed you guys the map, basically downstream of Pena Creek. So Pena Creek puts in a lot of sediment into Dry Creek. And during high storms, that sediment is being transported in Dry Creek and it's taking off ramps. I mean, it took those off ramps into your property, sir, just downstream in Reach 10, those have filled. It'll just keep going until it finds another avenue to go. It went into Esthete, it went downstream. It went into Reach 5, Reach 4. Downstream, it takes off ramps, even deposits in the main channel. So what we see is a pattern of deposition and not degradation from our side channel, or within our side channel.
So the question of does the excavation exacerbate erosion? Your answer would be the deposition does not seem to affect that erosion.
I think what Eric, maybe he explained this, but when they excavate the sediment, they take it to the same grade, they excavate to the same grade as the main channel. And they were designed that way, these channels, to actually encourage sediment to go into side channels and create this natural sustaining topography. Unfortunately, there's just so much sediment that it just deposits, but it's at grade with the main channel. So you're not seeing like any nick points or headward erosion. So you're seeing deposition because they're basically, it's the same grade as what the design was.
I have a question.
For all 4 miles, I don't know, I mean, I don't have.
From
a-
the original
hard number
project,
that's
not
been
from the
added up.
maintenance after.
Something on the order of 50,000 maybe cubic yards over the past 14 years.
And the reason I ask that is I've lived on the creek for 50 years. And I particularly am familiar with under Yoakum Bridge as a judge of street bed. Right up above Yoakum Bridge, USGA used to measure the depth of the stream there. I think you can go back, historically they did. That area has dropped 10 feet since I've been watching it. And a lot of the drop has happened after your project was completed, because where all this gravel you're taking out, it came from upstream, and it's this bed of the stream is dropping considerably.
Does your data show that that's the case?
One more thing.
I don't see that.
You don't see that there, go upstream. The other part of that is, as the bed of the stream drops, the banks came.
There was a contract we went into, got board approval for just shy of $1 million. It was $950,000 to conduct work this last summer in 2025 between the 2 different side channels. And we ended up accomplishing that work for just under $500,000, so we came in about $400,000 shy of our budget.
So
And
400,000 for this channel?
for that 1,000-foot channel, I would probably break it out. That was probably around $300,000.
Okay, thank you.
And that money comes from, we have an allocation, how much did you say for the fisheries and the?
So we budget about
Maintenance.
$1.3 million a year for maintenance right now, and the monitoring is about $1 million a year. There's a lot of investment in the monitoring and the regulatory processes, both the geomorphology work that Greg does, the biology work, that Neil does, and the biology work that Greg does, and then all the permitting required to get the permissions to do the project.
Come to you in just one second. I wanna, so back to what Richard was saying, which was, we saw this before with gravel mining, but would you have seen a very different chart for those gravel mining meters? You would have seen this number, so, I mean, I'm just educating myself. You're saying that you see the erosion as close as possible first to where that work was done.
Yes.
Can I mention?
Because I'm just gonna say something that is, I don't know the answer to. How much of the erosion in Dry Creek is because of natural conditions? How much of the erosion that still exists in Dry Creek is because of the dam itself and the water moving through? How much of the erosion is because of the habitat improvement projects and the maintenance on them, right? And I think that is really, the underpinning of the discussion, if we were gonna take this to a higher level and try and understand what's going on. Because I deal with landowners all the time, whether, not even just in Dry Creek, but in other areas, who can't stabilize or protect their land from being whisked away, right? You can't get a permit as a landowner to do it. I'm not gonna answer that right now. I'm not gonna answer all those questions, but I think that that's an important part of it, because this is a project, that's a regulatory project that has specific slivers of cause and effect and judgment and what you do. And it does not, I think we have to acknowledge, it does not create a holism of a healthy system by the river itself.
I support you on that.
Right?
Yeah, that's exactly.
And the thing that drives me nuts too is that like when I talk about trying to create a governance and like all these other things, is that these, like even the biological opinion itself that is over, it's not a vision document to create a healthy Russian River watershed. It's not. Like, so we're doing this, and then we're doing the Enhancement project to try and open up, like the Riverkeeper, and open up these other things. So anyways, we're at 8:30, we'll keep going. I do want to thank you for being here. I'll go to other questions, but we are gonna start to cycle down a little bit. But my commitment is to have us, I wanna do a follow-up call with the Dry Creek Valley Association leads and talk about information sharing, slides, reports, other things, but then also communications plan and other Q&As that have come up from this. Because there was also, I also want to acknowledge that we haven't talked about this tonight, but there was a lot of these questions were involved also in a list of questions that were put forth by Dawn and Riverkeeper that brought a lot of this together. I want to share that and do an appropriate back and forth.